So remember, in our first session, we learned about this biblical model of poverty. It's all about relationships and systems. The systems are supposed to work for the relationships, and the relationships positively influence the systems. But unfortunately, we live in a broken world with all of these schisms in our relationships and our systems, and that's why all of us are facing poverty in one way or another. We also learned about this healthy model of poverty alleviation, relief, rehabilitation, and development, and we did a little bit of work on how to determine when to use what form of poverty alleviation. And we discussed how development is the only long-term solution to poverty alleviation. We discussed paternalism and how easy it is for us to fall into the model of telling people what they need, especially in cultures that exist in a vastly different context, ones that often have different concepts of time and concepts of self, like we learned about last week. Paternalism is not inherently bad, but it is absolutely not the right practice for poverty alleviation, especially in short-term international mission work. We talked about strategies to avoid paternalism, like using asset-based development and approaching an issue or a people group using an asset-based assessment instead of a needs-based assessment. So this is asking questions like, what is important to you, rather than how can I fix you? And last week, we finally got the chance to talk about systems. And I realize this is a hard conversation because we are all living under these systems and have very different views on how well they work and on how to fix them when they're not working well. But it is important to recognize that these systems are inherently flawed and they skew in favor of some and not in others. And it is the materially poor, often minority groups or systemically oppressed groups, that live in the daily pain of our flawed systems. And it's important for us to recognize that. So with that very quick, brief review in mind, I want us to continue with this prompt that we started on last week at the very end. And again, I lost your notes, so I hope you didn't write anything important down, but you're welcome to start from scratch. So everyone has this same scenario. I'll read it out loud, but you also have it at your table. It says, the Ahmed family fled their war-torn country and now live in a small apartment in Garden Hills. The parents, Ali and Fatima, were skilled professionals in their home country, but in their new country, they struggle to find work due to language barriers and unrecognized credentials. Ali now works as a day laborer, and Fatima takes care of their young children at home. The family faces discrimination, isolation, and difficulties adjusting to the new culture. Their children are also struggling in school due to the language barrier and trauma from their past experiences. So there are 3 things that I want you to work on that hopefully you started last week. And the first is what systems are failing. And we talked about systems like these, or other systems. You can be more specific, more broad. And then asset mapping, which is asking what is right with you, what skills do you have, what assets do you have, what can you use to help yourself. And then I also want you to think about what assets our church has that could be useful in a development scenario with this family. And then, just for fun, if you were to develop something or a relationship or some kind of path towards poverty alleviation using our resources and their assets, what first 3 steps would you take as a church community? So, I'm going to give you plenty of time to talk about this, and then I'm going to ask each table to share just a little bit about what they came up with. So, enjoy. And this prompt and questions are on your table for you to read and look at. Okay, so we're going to start over here. Table number, 5. If you would, Pat, share a system that's failing and why you guys thought it was failing, and then go ahead and just give us brief answers to the next 2 questions.
Okay. What systems are failing? The first 2 that we came up with was the welfare system and the education system. And what was the other thing I was supposed to answer after that?
The 2 questions on your paper.
Okay. Oh, the asset map. I thought it was, all right. Well, number one is find out what they can do well
Uh-huh.
with the person that you're working with, so that you're.
You're saying he's a skilled professional.
Right.
You gotta find out what profession.
What profession?
What profession is he skilled at?
Yeah.
And then make that known throughout the church.
Yeah. That's a great question to ask.
Still yours. Still mine.
Is one of the things that John had mentioned, take the person that is underutilized. If they've got this skill and they're underutilized as a church, then we could, make suggestions and open up
Are you talking about
opportunities.
Fatima, the mom who stays home and doesn't work?
No.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood.
Well, whoever,
They were skilled professionals
Right.
in their home country.
Yeah.
So he's got some type of skill, and if you let it be known, throughout the church, if you let that skill be known throughout the church, either people need that skill or they know of people that might need that skill.
Yep.
And
Yeah, very true. And it says both of them were skilled professionals
Yep.
too. So both of them are being underutilized. Yeah.
One thing we wanted to share was that we want to help them to help themselves, to ignite something inside of them that gets a little fire going so that they see hope. In other words, the handout thing is not working. But if you get somebody that has a purpose and they feel like that what they're doing is contributing to you, then that gives them a desire to even do more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You guys have anything else to share? All right. Thank you, Table 5. Table 4. Hey, Jamie, could you silence your phone for us? Thank you.
I haven't even been here. Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. Would you like us to discuss a system that is failing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, communication came up because that's where we need to start if we're going to help them. If we don't work from a common language or knowledge of a language, then, and plus how we're going to communicate in the future through telephone, or how we're going to set up ways to reach them, contact them. So that's really key, I think, in terms of doing anything, because if you can't, we can't do charades. But the children are getting language in school, so that's a positive. But how about the adults, the mother and father? Would it be good to try to get them into some sort of class where they could learn the language?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we had a class or sent them, helped them source it out.
Mm-hmm. Offering language classes is a really
language
great
classes.
ministry.
We go to Garden Hills and help the children learn how to read, so we could help adults as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you would like another one?
What you got?
Yeah. She's coyly. Well, we talked about discrimination, isolation. Housing, they seem to be okay. They have an apartment. Healthcare, we don't really, that's a big one. I don't even know how to begin to tackle that.
Mm-hmm. That would be a great question to ask them if they are insured, if Ali's job is providing health insurance for his family. That's a great first question to ask.
Right, but if he's working as a day laborer.
Yeah. It is likely they would need help getting into a system where they can have health care.
Right.
Or health insurance, yeah.
Like a form or an application of some sort that they can be in our community. And maybe we as adults have some contacts if we're not in that field itself. So we could maybe channel them along to help them find a job that offers benefits. Is that why you're nodding?
You're giving me great answers.
Okay. I haven't been here, but I'm coming up with
You're
these
doing
on the
a great
top of
job.
my head.
You're doing a great job.
Okay. Do you want, okay, what else would you like?
Answer the next two questions.
Okay, asset mapping. Okay. Well, the assets we talked about were that the children and the parents are skilled. They discussed that too. And the children are, we figure, intelligent. But again, the father has a job, the mother's at home, but then how are we going to put their skills to use so that they can be, as they were saying, underutilized? We need to take those to a maximum. And so could we get them some inventory tests or some kind of skill tests where we could, or drive them to a agency that helps us.
To help transfer their credentials. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then again, communication's going to come into play because they have to be able to tell us what skills they have. So I think communication is the bottom line to me. Okay, what are the first 3 steps we could take as a congregation development? Okay, we could, I think we've already said this, develop or find a language class for the parents or offer one here. We can invite them to our church or help them find a group or congregation because they may not be Christians. Find a community ministry like BCM that has helps them with a budget. I think they're doing now. We have that resource. And then Toco Hills Alliance, we could utilize that group. We can't do that. We can do that because they have food.
They do have food.
And we can help them transportationally. And we can divide up the labor among people in the church. And we can set up a phone tree. But we got to get them a phone and we got to learn how to communicate with them first.
Yep.
Okay.
Very good, table 4. Very
Okay.
good. Very good.
Okay, for question 1, what systems are failing? Ditto. On the education and communication, that has to be the first thing. It doesn't help if you take their phone number and their email address if they can't read our emails and can't understand what we're saying on the phone. And we can't say, hey, do you want to go grocery shopping? Because they can't tell us what they need. So education, English is the second language, all that. Asset mapping, so we know they have the skills, we know they have the housing, they have whatever skills they have, we need to help them work on getting the certifications in this area, this country, to make their skills usable and marketable. Isolation was mentioned. So a good way we were thinking for isolation is to invite them maybe to a local event, like food. Hey, we're having a dinner. Please come. Oh, you want to bring, I don't know, tamales or whatever you have at home. Come and let's just have a neighborhood potluck here. We can have it outdoor in the plaza. We could have it in here. But, so we don't need to share the same language sitting across from the table, smiling and eating. Eating is my love language, so that's good. And then what are the first 3 steps? Obviously, the first step is to form a committee, and the second step would be to come up with a budget, and I will leave that 3rd step to the next table. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. All right, table 1. Are you ready?
I'll talk this first time. We said a lot of the same things. I won't repeat them for sake of time. We had a few questions though that aren't part of the answers, which were, how do we certify their credentials? We don't know how to do that. That'd be good. That'd be a good asset for us to have, or help find. And then also, we just wrote, I wonder what language they speak, which doesn't matter, but we just wanted to know. And our church, we talked about things that the church as a kind of top-down can do, like our benevolence ministry, but also what individuals in our church could be capable of doing if they were given the freedom to, or the connection to be able to make those, to provide those assets to the family.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, everyone. This task is not meant to be easy, and I think Table 4 did a great job of, I'm giving you a compliment, but it's not going to sound like it, of like talking in circles around the issue, because it really is this big, well, we could do this, but we can't because of this, but we can't do that because we have to do this, and it's so complicated and so difficult, and if it wasn't, we wouldn't need to be having this conversation. I heard a lot of communication as a barrier. I heard a lot of helping them use their skills in this country, which could be, something as incredible as being a doctor, and those skills just don't transfer to the American healthcare system. Yeah. And helping someone utilize those skills, does anyone remember what type of poverty that heals on the little thing? It's the relationship between self and the rest of creation. When you are utilizing your skills and your gifts to serve others, it helps heal that. And so they're really missing that in their lives because they just don't have the same opportunities here. One thing that you all talked about, almost every table mentioned, was English classes, which is an incredible ministry for a church to have. I would also challenge us to think about, especially because of the area that we're in, speaking separate from this scenario, but Garden Hills Elementary is heavily Spanish speaking, and a lot of parents there do not speak very good English. And their kids do because they're in school. But there's also the opportunity for us to learn Spanish so that we can talk to our neighbors. So those language classes kind of go both ways. If you really want to be able to communicate with a family coming into our community, you need to put forth the effort to learn their language as well. So very good. Thank you all for doing that. We're going to go through the last couple chapters of the book, and then we will close in this little prayer project. So, the last few chapters give us some steps that we can take that kind of takes all of the things that we've learned and it helps us figure out ways to move our ministries and the way that we as individuals approach poverty towards a sustained and participatory development that is a constantly improving process. And we're going to begin with these 5 core principles to help us get started, and these begin on page 207 in your book if you choose to follow along. The first principle is to foster triggers for human change. So as you see in this image, we're all sort of functioning in this cycle. Our life experiences lead to reflections, which lead to decisions, which lead to actions, which then lead to our life experiences. And our whole life just follows this pattern of doing, affecting, being, and being influencing doing. So this cycle can be really healthy, and the cycle can be really unhealthy. And when we're talking about poverty of any kind, we are seeing unhealthy behaviors in this cycle. So the question is, how can we influence change? What's something that could potentially disrupt this cycle? And so the answer is a trigger. So a trigger is often seen as something negative or damaging, and that's because a trigger is often something negative or damaging, but in this case, a trigger is simply something that interrupts the cycle. This chapter discusses 3 different types of triggers that can influence change. The first is a crisis, and we have talked about crisis before in our relief, rehabilitation, and development model. It's really any event that negatively alters your state of being, which sounds like a bad thing to happen, but it is good for knocking us out of an unhealthy cycle. And this trigger could be anything. It could be loss of a job, loss of a loved one. It could be an arrest, a near-death experience, a breakup, anything that sort of shocks us into focus and out of this spinning circle. The second type of trigger is the burden of the status quo becoming so overwhelming that we need to make a change. So this is sort of the tough love that we've talked about in a previous chapter. If someone who is experiencing homelessness, for example, has their relief resources taken away, they will have no choice but to make a change in how they are functioning, which is hard for us to imagine because the Bible tells us to not let people leave who are thirsty or hungry or need clothes to wear. But it shocks into action because I'm trying to live without the material things you need. It is unbearable. And the third type of trigger is an introduction to a new way of doing things that can lead to the desire to change. And remember, there are healthy, asset-based, and participatory ways to introduce a new way of doing things that is not paternalistic. The second principle is to mobilize supportive people. And we started talking about networks over here at Table 4. This is supportive people in your church who have time, energy, resources, and skills to be advocates and allies, and mobilizing people in the life of the individual who are working with, mobilizing people in the life of the individual who you're working with. These are people who will support without jealousy and without inciting temptation, which can be difficult to find. This is also a process of expanding and mobilizing an individual's network. So someone who is experiencing particularly material poverty is often alone. They lack people in their lives who have influence over others and influence over resources. So a huge part of individual poverty alleviation is building a network. And it begins with this first outer ring of individuals who agree to be allies. Those allies will have networks, and those networks will have influence in systems that this individual does not have. Because remember, this person is likely not someone that these systems were created for. I would challenge each of you and each of us to look at our lives and track all of the ways that networks have gotten you to where you are now. Almost every job I've ever had is because I knew someone or because I came with a reference from someone who knew someone. And imagine how much harder or how impossible it would be to get where you are without those networks. And use that kind of reality check, looking back on your life and pointing out those things, use that to become an ally in this space where your connections are very much so needed. And that's an asset that this church has an abundance of. Okay, principle 3, look for early recognizable success. So I resonate with this suggestion a lot because I will give up on something so fast if I don't see instant improvement. The reality is that success motivates. So for example, if your goal is to send every child in Atlanta home on Fridays with 6 meals for them to eat over the weekend, you're going to be waiting a very long time to meet that goal. So we set smaller goals, like let's identify the number of students at Garden Hills Elementary who require supplemental meals on the weekend, and our goal is to have that list compiled in 2 weeks. And then when we meet that first goal, we have already met success in our programming. Principle 4 is learn the context as you go. This is sort of a participation in this model of action and reflection. And the point of this is to avoid this blueprint model of missions. We didn't spend a ton of time talking about the blueprint model, but it is found in chapter 6 if you want to go back and read more about it. But basically, this is the act of walking with people, trying things together, reflecting on them together, taking new action together. It is the long-term process of a participatory model, and it keeps us from being this big clunky elephant that we talked about last week that is smushing our poor little friend mouse. And finally, principle 5, start with people who are most receptive to change. We do not have the ability to force change on anyone, and when you find yourself wishing you had the ability to force change, I mean, me too, that would be really nice. But I would challenge us to take a step back and remember the context of your perspective. and also remember that forced change is not a method of healing. So this chapter offers sort of a spectrum or a continuum of receptivity to change, and this figure is found on page 218 if you want to look at that instead of the one on the screen. But this spectrum starts all the way from the lowest receptivity to change, there is no problem, to the highest receptivity to change, which says I'm willing to demonstrate this change and advocate for others. And this is referring to change both in someone's personal life or in a larger system. So those are the 5 principles. Any questions about the 5 principles? Okay. This book is really great at giving us lists of things to do. So I have one more list for you. And this is pretty much the last thing we're going to talk about in this book. So this final list is steps to take in an asset-based participatory development, which is kind of just what we've been building up to this whole time. With all of those previous principles in mind, these are steps to put knowledge into action within the context of our church. So let's imagine an issue of poverty arises in our community. There are a ton of issues we could pinpoint, but let's just make one up in our imagination. The first thing we're going to do is wonder what Second-Ponce has to offer. What are our resources? Who are our people? And what are our gifts? What services and organizations already exist in our area that could help, that it could better help in this scenario? Do we have partnerships with them? And if not, could we have partnerships with them? How could this single instance of poverty alleviation help us to form a new partnership in our community? And both of those first points you all just did in that exercise. What other assets are at play in this scenario? If we're dealing with an individual, what resources and skills do they have? Who do they know? What capacity do they have to put in work for themselves? When someone comes to our church for benevolence, for example, when they come for the first time, they have to answer a bunch of questions about their living situation. When did they last have a job? What, do they have family in the area? Anything else that's going on in their lives? And all of that is part of an asset-based participatory policy that we practice here. And finally, the favorite part of my job, and unfortunately something that we often jump to too quickly, is the possibility of starting a new ministry. So it is so much fun to dream about all of the things that we could do as a church, but it is also so easy to forget the 500 steps that we learned just from this book. To be able to create ministry well and create a ministry in a way that is helping without hurting others and ourselves. So these are the 4 steps that this book kind of finishes on. Let me remind us of our purpose in this study, and that was to start at the beginning of why and how we think about and do mission work, and to engage in critical discussion about our own practices or potential practices. I hope that you feel that we have lived out that purpose in the last 4 weeks. If you don't, feel free to email me about it. We can chat later. But I want to leave us with one final project, and I left you an appropriate amount of time to do it. We have whole 10 minutes. And this project is going to be a prayer. So I ask that each table take a few minutes. There is a fancy little looking card that I put on your table. Write 2 to 3 sentences of prayer on that. Prayer for our community, prayer for people in our city, prayer for the world, any ways that we have talked about poverty in the past month. Put a prayer down for it. Put a prayer down for our church and the way that we do mission work and the way that we could potentially do mission work. So just 2 to 3 sentences, and then I'm going to gather them all up and read them as a prayer to close us out. Okay? Okay. All right. Y'all forgive me. I am not great at reading everyone's handwriting, but we're going to pray together. And yes, I do know how to read cursive. I've gotten a couple questions. I learned it in the 2nd grade. It just takes a minute. All right, so if I stumble, forgive me, but let's pray together. God, we ask your wisdom to help us minister to those less fortunate. Help us recognize what we can do and how to respond. Surprise us with the things we can do and help us to find your will. Pray for discernment and clarity of our actions and the problem. Pray for caring. Help us to help others in the right way. Pray for us to be available to God's leadership. Bless us, O Lord. Let us also be a blessing to others. Help us to be aware of the needs of others. Give us discernment, patience, and empathy as to how we may best serve those people in need. Open our eyes to see the needs and possibilities around us. Open our eyes to see the gifts and abilities of our church and guide us in connecting these. God, thank you for the people in this room who have dedicated their time to the study of improving how we do things. It is not an easy task, and it's not a task that we have completed, and it is not a space that we have left with a bunch of answers. Guide us as we continue this conversation and as we dream about ways for our church to do your work in the world. Give us wisdom, give us discernment, give us hope, and bring us joy in these actions. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right. Good job, everybody.